Good afternoon. Today I'm going to take you on a journey through wonderful colours, pretty pictures, and inspiring stories. And I see the talk before had an impact on this presentation. Luckily, I've seen the end of this presentation, and so my designs will not look quite as good as this. They'll look something a little bit more relaxed, gentle, pleasing on the eye. So it's important to state that I am not a designer. I am a developer who have just paid attention to what designers do and worked at some amazing companies with some amazing users and understood what works, what they like, what they find pleasing, but more importantly, what do they hate and what is it that actually really disturbs them and really that blocker, that mindset which goes, this is ugly, how the hell can I use this? The most important thing to know, follow me on Twitter and follow all of my beautiful drunken antics, which I've stopped now, because now I'm a sensible speaker, apparently, this year. Today, the key topics will be based around what I think are the fundamentals to any good design. These are the concepts, the foundations that you need to know, and then you can go forward and build and incorporate them into your own applications. So we'll start with layout, how to make things align correctly, and what's actually important in that world. Images, the colors, the typography, and then finally, and most importantly, the feedback. So why does this matter in the first place? Why are we all standing, sitting, looking at me, instead of the wonderful, beautiful Rob Ashton next door? Well, as developers, what we do lasts quite a long time. A film in 1996 is still accessible to the website today. So what we need to do needs to look as beautiful as it can when we're doing it. Because who knows how long it will last, and who knows how long users will be wanting to use it for. But more importantly, attractive things just fundamentally work better. It's science. There's a study on a Japanese ATM machine, a cash point. Exactly the same software, exactly the same under-the-covers device, just a slight change to the keypad. One had one design, the second had a completely different design. When asked, users said one of the machines was completely buggy. It didn't work at all. The software on it was fundamentally broken. It wasn't. It was actually exactly the same thing. It was just a slightly different design. And users interpret this as being broken. This means that when we're demoing our software to people, and it's not as they expect in terms of design, they'll think it's broken. Doesn't matter how many tests we have, how much good code coverage. If it doesn't look good, they'll already assume it's not going to work. And this is what design does. It creates an emotional reaction. It's very similar to falling in love. People will have that preconceived expectation, that input, before they've actually even realized what's happening, what they're doing, what they want. The result of all of this is credibility. That's what we're aiming for, right? We want to be credible, influential. The more we are, the more important our software is. And that goes both ways. Sometimes we want to use design to influence credibility in a negative way. So Craigslist is like a very popular website where you can list what you want to sell, spare rooms, flat shares. It's actually not a very trustworthy, reliable website. There's a lot of scams on there, a lot of people just trying to take your money. If Craigslist had this beautiful, really well thought out design, more like Airbnb, people would be more likely to trust it. If they're more likely to trust it, they're more likely to agree and hand over the money to the user. But actually, Craigslist don't want that. Craigslist want the user to have a little bit of fear, a little bit of uncertainty, to make sure they know what they're doing. On the flip side, we have Apple. They use their design, their influence, their credibility to build things and build such a hype around things that people may not even want, such as an Apple Watch. And then we have software craftsmanship. It's kind of like a big thing. There's a few big people kind of in that area. And it's amazing, right? It's all about building reliable software which works, which should be like perfect, right? test coverage everywhere, automated pipelines, delivering value to users, all of this wonderful thing. And then it gets to the UI, and it's just don't test it. Don't write any automated tests. Didn't actually cover anything about design. And I think it's a really big missing gap, which we should be more concerned about. Because, as I said, if it looks better, it works better. In the world of startup, which is where I'm mainly based, everyone should be a designer. Like, design and what you're building is important, because that's what users have. But also, if you have a designer on the team, and you're the engineer and the developer, being able to understand what they're creating, what they're trying to achieve, and why they're trying to achieve it, just helps the communication. It helps the flow. And as such, together you can just move quicker, move faster, build better products. And this, I think design is actually very similar to code. It's got the same mindset, the same thought process. You've got certain patterns, you've got certain practices. You've got things which you copy, and things which you just fundamentally don't do. You've got the same feedback cycles as you do with test-driven development. You just do it at a slightly different level. So this is why, people say that developers can't become designers. It's a lie. They can. You just have to think slightly differently and approach the problem in a slightly different way. And this kind of brings on to the whole junior, senior, and it's the same with code. They approach it in two different ways. A junior designer will take some random images and some random blocks and try to make them unified. Try to make them look like they should look. Whereas a senior designer, they'll try and create something which is actually valuable, something which is actually what the user is trying to achieve. Junior designer will go, the hard problem is always with the actual design. Which actually, like the rest of it, it's not that hard. It's quite simple. Like shipping it, you just put it online. As we know as developers as well, the problem is not design. The problem gets extremely harder as we get closer to releasing and as we get closer to moving and shipping our software. And junior designers have this mindset that there's an end, there's a finish, and that you keep hammering at it and eventually you'll find your way. You'll get there, you'll get to the point, and then you're done. With design, and the same with code, the reality is there's multiple different ways to get to that finished goal. Multiple different ways to achieve what you want to achieve. You just have to try different things. See what works. If it doesn't work, try a different path. Throw it out. Prototype, sketch, gain feedback. So firstly, let's move on to what I think the fundamentals are. And that the most important one for me is layout. So there's two different ways that people instantly start processing a application or a website. You've got the left side thinkers and the right side thinkers. The right side is generally more the creatives, the artists, the people who are just kind of like more colourful. And as a result, they look at let me make sure I actually get this the right way around, otherwise that would be embarrassing. They look at it as an overall work of art. They look at it as an overall piece of beauty. And then they'll start noticing the finer, more intricacies, like the pixels being slightly out of place. Where the left side, which is generally the developers and the mathematicians and those areas, they look at the details first, and then slowly it comes into this bigger picture and they see it as a whole. But they'll be the first ones to notice that pixels out of place or something's not quite aligned correctly before they notice it overall. People used to think either one or the other, which is not true. You are both. Your brain processes and gets to the end result eventually. You just come at it as a different way. So you need to think about it as a whole. White space really helps. White space is a great technique, which many people are scared of. Oh, if it looks white, it looks plain, it's boring. Like there should be stuff. Like cram in as much information as possible. But no, just a little white space. Just let things breathe. Just a little bit. Let things pop. Let that call to action have some room so people can actually focus on it just a little bit more. With text, same paragraph. But just increasing that line height just makes it just a little bit more readable. People hate reading online anyway. It's awkward, it's difficult, you just scan read. By increasing the line height, you just make it easier for the user, a more pleasant, relaxing experience. And the same goes with emphasis. It's really important. You want to make sure that what you're trying to bring people's attention to is the thing which you're actually pointing out. If everything has the same emphasis, the same bold type, the same colour, it's just a sheet. Users can't identify. Why are we doing this to them? It's painful, it's awkward, and they won't like us for it. Use boldness, use different types, just to highlight and bring out what's important. We can come to different sizes. So there is the golden ratio. Just a simple equation which people use to determine different widths of things. And the thing is, 1.6 is the magic number. But it's just separating things. So this is everywhere. We don't even realize that there is this golden ratio in the world, but we'd have it in the Mona Lisa before there was even deep thinking on this. Beautiful flowers have this ratio which naturally make it more appealing to them. And even the human body has this set ratio. As a result, this is what we interpret to be more natural. We see it as being more real, more realistic. It's what we expect. So once you follow it, users aren't shocked. Twitter use it in their layout because it's what users expect. Our brains are just naturally inclined to appreciate this separation and this layout. If 50-50 down the middle, it would just look weird. It would be odd. It wouldn't be normal. And that's because our brains are used to seeing this ratio around everyday work. And people say Apple use it everywhere. And I do believe that they used it with the cloud logo. If you see a cloud logo which doesn't look like this, it just looks weird. It looks misshapen. You've got bubbles in the wrong place where they shouldn't be and at the wrong size. Your brain just is trying to work it out and it's not quite right. I do think the other one, with lots of 8s and 6s, is just made up. And they just tried to shoehorn in to make a good example. But fundamentally, this is all down to science. It's that off-putting slightly, it's not quite centre, and it's not quite straight, which makes it really more difficult for us to process and take into account. And this is a natural science. Square things generally are harder to process. They take more energy, more influence. Whereas as you make things rounder, make things softer, our brains start to process it in a slightly different way. And as such, it just feels more natural and flows, and it's easier to take into account and understand. Because fundamentally, we're kind of taught that round corners are dangerous. As children, and as we're growing up, we use things to protect them from these sharp edges, because sharp edges hurt and they'll cause harm. And we've taken this in from a very early age. Steve Jobs was very strong that nothing should have a sharp edge, because that's not natural. That's not what we expect. We expect things to be slightly softer, because things like road signs aren't a sharp edge. Because if they were, people would be getting hurt. They'd be walking into them, bumping them, scratching themselves. So as such, we've created these safety measures to make it softer. It also is how we change and how we drive focus again. Sharp edges focus on the outside, whereas slightly rounder, your eyes are drawn in. It creates it more engaging. As it being more engaging, this is what you want the users to see, which is the whole purpose, right? Whatever's in the center of the square is what you actually would want the users to work on. Unless you're Microsoft, which kind of breaks all of this rules for some strange reason. But fundamentally, when it comes to layout, the best one is just to copy. Try different things, move different things around, see what breaks, see what doesn't feel right. That's the best way to do all of this design, is to copy it. Once you start copying, you'll start seeing the patterns, the learning, the exercises. And then your brain just becomes more aware. You start seeing things just slightly differently. So now we have images and icons. as I said earlier, people online just generally don't read anything. It's just a well-known fact. So, if we don't want to overload them with information, icons are a great way to achieve that. And it's that recognition. If you see something, boom, you don't need to read it. You just automatically know what it will do. Share icons, for example, especially with iOS and Android, very distinct about their use case and their guidelines. If you see that share icon, you know it's sharing. You don't have to have text or definition to say what it's going to do. Users just instantly know. I would have had a Windows Phone share one, but it's really difficult to find, which is amazing. And then it comes to spacing and layout. So this is the grid for the Apple iPhone guideline. This is what it should look like. So I started building just a very simple prototype application. The aim was to find the next open bar when the current one you're in has closed. It's useful. I'm always getting kicked out of bars at the end of the night. So I built a very simple vector. It's nothing special, it's just a placeholder. But there was something about it which just didn't feel right. When I was looking at it on my phone, it's just like, it's off. I don't understand it, but it's off. So I downloaded the grid, overlaid, and it's just like, it's all outside of the normal bounds of what Apple recommend. And as such, it was a few pixels higher than the rest of the icons in my row, and as such, my brain was going, that's off, that's weird. Why is that not like everything else? Just by bringing it in, just making it fit, just made it look exactly the same as everything else. There were no sharp, jagged edges, no differences. It just flowed and my brain could actually process it. If you look side by side, there's very little actual difference to them. Really, that's the one which is slightly smaller. But when you're actually looking at it as a user, it makes a huge difference because anything outside of what you expect is weird. And as designers, you need to pay attention to this. Images also help create beauty and desire. Airbnb really took advantage of this. This is why they employed photographers to go around and take the shots themselves, because whatever the user submitted was with weird cameras, weird lighting, just didn't make it very appealing. By using their own photos, they could build a beautiful looking website with very high desirable items in it. As such, that led to design. You don't have to do that much design work if you've got beautiful images surrounding it. They're doing the work for you. Unless you're using stock photography, and then it just is a bit weird. Those office photos where everyone's really happy in suits, smiling and cheering, and being a really good team. Users don't like that because it's fake. They know it's fake. No one in that scenario ever does that. And as such, they just reject it. So once you've got these beautiful looking images, you can start using them as your foundation, your color palette for the rest of the website. So this is a great tool by Adobe. And you just upload an image and it will pick out the highlight, the key points, the key colors, which are complementary to each other. And then you just work with that. You don't have to fight it, you just work with it. If you take and user upload images, which aren't quite the size which you need them to be, then you can just expand them out, make them really blurry, and they just feel more natural. With the iPhone application, it's a dating website. The pictures are going to be profile images from a user's Facebook account. They don't know what colors they're going to be. They don't know what shade. They don't know anything. All they know is the size. By using it as a blurry background, they make it feel more natural, more at home, more pleasant, more pleasing. It just fits. Instead of just using a plain, boring white background, they've taken advantage of this imagery. And you can use this to get the user to achieve what you want to achieve. So here, just a normal standard sign-up page. But if you look where she's looking, it's down towards the sign-up button. Users are naturally, they'll see her and they'll look where she's looking, because that's what we do. They've also used the image as a color palette. her jumper is the same colour as the sign up button to make it feel more harmonious, more connected, more together. And with these images, you can start helping these power users. So on OS X, if you want to turn off the notifications, then you have to click on the button, scroll it down slightly, toggle the on-off button, and then 24 hours later, it will be completely undone. It's actually really quite frustrating, unless you know what the icon does, and you do an alt-click, and then it's off instantly. You're using this to help the user, help the power users achieve what they want to achieve quicker, through recognition and through the icons. And it's also helping not overloading and cluttering up the UI. By alt-clicking again, you can show them more information. They want more information at this very targeted point in time in their experience. Generally, they just want to select their Wi-Fi, unless certain people are running all of the Wi-Fi networks and killing everything. But generally, they'll just want to connect. But sometimes they need that bit more of information. So give it to them when they ask for it. Same with iMessages. Most of the time, if you're in a chat, you don't need to know the time that the message was sent. It's instant. I know what time it was because it was 2 seconds ago. I don't need that information repeated. But people generally do it in UIs all of the time. iOS, you slide slightly and you reveal that time when the user's asking for it, because they want that information at that point. You're just cleaning up the UI with these fancy tricks, which makes a huge impact. Don't have to be a designer, you just have to start tricking the user's mind slightly. And then you just optimize it. Right? What's the point in sending down a big, massive image which has got that slightly slower download time when you can just run it through an application and save 20%? 20% load times instantly is amazing. Right? That's a big, massive win for free. And then you can start getting smart about your use of icons on different devices. Like if it's on an iPhone, a small little house will do. But that small little house on a desktop would look weird. So use a responsive icon, one which actually enhances the experience for the user. So coming on to colours, we've got these beautiful images which kind of help and make it more desirable for the user. But now there needs to be more colour, which needs to be worked seamlessly. So colour theory has been around for a while, a few years, and people's got different interpretations of it. So this approach is slightly more spiritual. It's kind of relating it to the seasons, the time of the year, and it's very much around kind of creativity. So purple is creativity and wisdom, whereas red is slightly energy and courage, and it's got that more kind of approach to try and define what these colours are. This isn't very helpful in software. I find this one a little bit more realistic and a bit more approachable. And it's quite interesting. Like red, anger, rage. Like yes, you use red for error messages. So you want to encourage, like that's the emotion what the user's experiencing, and so they're connected. On the flip side, green, trust. The test pass, we are trusted. There's a natural reason why we're using these colours. The interesting one is dark green. And it took me a while to think, why is a light green trusted? And why did that feel like normal? But dark green is fear and terror. And then I started to think to zombie movies. Zombies are always green. It's like, oh, maybe it does actually have some sound logic in my head. By using these colours in the right way, we can just start getting the users to feel what we want them to feel at the appropriate time. Just very subtle things that add up and complete and make the experience a whole. And then you can use various patterns around the colour palette to actually start choosing colours which work together more wisely. So I generally go for complementary colours, just because that's what feel good. But as long as you're using these set patterns, then you generally can find colours which work nicely together. The worst thing to do is use colours which just don't make any sense at all. I've worked with a few designers who said, yes, information. Success messages should be red because we want the user to see them. It's like, really? Like, a build pass in red is not what the user is going to expect. Yes, they'll see it and they'll process it, but we don't want them to process it. We just want them to see that it's green, everything's great. The same with warnings. Like, if it's a warning, why is it red? Like, surely it's just a more subtle colour to cause a reaction. We don't want users to be scared, angry, enraged, just by offering them a warning. This is where, like, subtle tricks help express what we want to express. But what's the point in expressing anything if users can't actually read it in the first place? And this is where it comes to typography. Typography is extremely important and actually not discussed as much as it deserves. Firstly, it's massively creative. Like, people go to town with different artworks. Like, who would have thought about using zombies as letters? But it's actually really engaging and different and creative. Like, why would you just use a normal font when you could do something like this? It also helps reinforce and reminds me that zombies are green. And people do a lot of effort, a lot of hard work, and use typographies in ways which you just wouldn't normally imagine to create these beautiful works of art, which, when we were in Valencia, there was an entire exhibition on. An entire art museum just dedicated to typography. And people become creative. Like, who would have thought about doing something like this? It's beautiful. It works. It's really engaging, but different. And in design, the font can make all the difference. That can be your starting point, your inspiration. To find things which you want to find, and experience the things which you want to experience. And they all have their own personality. As I was saying with the zombies, that's exposing and that's expressing personality within the application, what we want users to feel. And it helps express and market and brand our products, such as this Stephen King book cover. If that was just a normal font, then who cares? It's not that interesting. But just adding something different, for me, makes it more compelling, more desirable. Actually fits with what the user and the author and the artist is trying to express. And because remember, if it looks better, it works better. So let's try just building something which looks and feels how it should feel. Unless you go a little bit too far. And then it can get slightly dangerous. Like, the letters are just about making out. Just about. But you can go a little bit too much off the other edge. So I wouldn't recommend this as your main typeface. And there are subtle differences between what the actual fonts and the typefaces mean. Two main ones. One's used for print, one's used for web. The one for print, which is the one in red, has got slightly different endings, slightly different tails on the edge of every letters. This helps you read and the words to flow when it's actually on a printed page and makes it easier for us to process. But on the web, these tails actually cause us harm because they become pixelated and we can't make them out quite so clearly, even on a retina display. And as such, you just remove those. You drop those tails, use a different typeface, just to help the user engage. And there's lots of interesting fonts now. The world's changed. It used to be Arial, and I used Arial for everything. Because why would you use anything else? Yet now we've got some really beautiful fonts, which users find more interesting, and actually help us do things slightly differently and express what we want to express. And also, it's not just bold or regular anymore. It's slightly different. You've got different variations which express what we feel differently. So a thinner font and a thinner typeface actually is known to be more desirable. It's more high-end. It's more luxury. This is why Medium uses it as their kind of main type, because they want to create this beautiful, desirable website of luxury and high valuable content. If it was bold everywhere, it doesn't have quite the same impact, and the users just engage with it in a slightly different way. So just think, it's not all about just being bold. And actually, the reason behind this is because we now use typefaces differently. Modern browsers use them and render them in a slightly different way. They actually use the typeface, where previously it was a standard typeface and then using algorithms to make it bold or not, which made it more edgy, more blurry, more difficult. So now, with these modern techniques and modern ways, modern typefaces, we can take advantage and start being and expressing things in a slightly different way. And if we're looking at users' behaviour and what users think, then why is all caps shouting? And I tried to look this up, and I tried to look at various different techniques why there is this natural connotation and this natural connection. And the best definition I could find was it's harder to read. You have to stop and read and process every single letter individually, and as such it takes more energy, and so it's more demanding, it's more controlling, it's more visible, and as such it feels like shouting because it's more aggressive. Whereas it's lowercase, it's more natural, it just flows, doesn't take as much work, and so it's less aggressive. This is why I think all caps is shouting. And the best way when it comes to types is just to experiment. Just try lots of different random beautiful things and see what looks and feels better. So when I'm trying to do a logo, just random different typefaces. I knew I had a vague thing in my head what I want to achieve. But different typefaces just help you pick which ones. And even subtle details within each type can make a huge difference. Like the only difference between this one, really, is the letter S. One's slightly more difficult to read, and as such, was unusable. Because it just added a little bit more effort, looked a little bit weird, and so it just didn't fit with what I expected, and what users expected when I tested it. But the main rule, don't use more than 3. 3 is about the magic number, where users don't notice the difference and notice the change. You start introducing more, it actually does more harm than it does good. People take it at a lower quality if it's got lots of different variations because it takes more work. It's not consistent, it doesn't feel more natural, and as such, they just go against it. They just fight against it, and you don't want users fighting. I do it enough, there's no point. So then we come on to feedback. So feedback is probably the most important aspect for what you want users to do. And there's 2 types. The first one is giving the user feedback, telling them that something has happened. Touch events, for example, on mobile, is really important. You want the user to feel that they've actually touched something. You want the application to respond. If it responds, then they connect more with the product. The more connection they have, the more they love it. If it's just cold, flat, dead, that's the reaction which the users perceive. And as such, that's what they'll think about your application. They'll figure out it's dead, lifeless, boring. Just a subtle response makes all the difference because users connect with that in a very subtle way. And you can also use this to your advantage. So Cloudflare used to take 60 seconds to scan your DNS records when you're moving a domain name. Now, they could have just went, you know what, 60 seconds, just go back, wait, go back, do something else, come back to us when we're done. But they actually did it in a slightly different way. Firstly, they used a countdown timer, seconds, but they included milliseconds to make it feel like it's going quicker than what it actually is, because it's a rapid countdown now, because you're seeing things move quickly. Interesting. Also, they added a 50-second video explaining what they're doing, explaining how Cloudflare works, trying to use that time more wisely to create the user and have them being more engaged into what the product's doing, and have them love the product a little bit more. And then when it comes to error messages, this is the worst time, and this is where we lose users completely. Like, why does the user need to know error 208? Like, does that really help them in any way? An error has occurred. Like, great, thanks. What can I do now? Like, click OK. Cool, excellent, good. And then the beautiful one in the corner, no error has occurred. Like, okay. And again, this comes down to what users expect, what users interpret. If you're popping up those dialogues, then the user's going to see that and go, why did I just pay for your software, Macromedia Dreamweaver? At some point, a developer would have had to code that. Not quite sure what they had in mind, but that's an interesting test case of what they would have had to cover. And then you want to help the users make the right choice. If you're on a travel website and you're booking something and you're filling in your address and you've got an IP address which says which country you're from, the chances are that country should probably be near the top of the list, if not pre-selected. Why would you have a list of every single possibility and make the user scroll when they're already giving you the information which you need to help them make the choice which they need to make? Smart defaults are a really powerful way of just helping the user just do what they want to achieve and not get in the way. Let them help them solve the problem. But also help them undo the problem when they've completely screwed up. I now don't have to ponder about clicking that send button quite as much, because I know that if I spot that typo 2 seconds later, then I can click undo and it will be fine. It's given me a safety net, and it's made me just trust the product a little bit more and just make me feel more comfortable. The second one is receiving feedback. What do people think about our stuff? And at this point, it's very important to say the questions we're asking is not, do you like it? Because users will always say, yes. People naturally want to please. People don't want to offend unless in very extreme, strange circumstances. Usability tests are a great way to find out this information, but they need to be run properly. You need to use them to find out more information. If you just keep asking, do you like it? You're not going to get the answer which you want. What you actually want to do is treat it more like a date. Ask more questions than what you're talking. Don't give them the answer. Just keep asking, finding out more about them. What do they like? What do they do? Where do they go? In certain scenarios, how do they perform certain things? What you're trying to do is get into their head and understand. And then hopefully what your understanding it is matches what you've built, what you've developed, what's happening inside your application. And the two work side by side. At this point, you can actually show them. Get them to give them feedback. Show them something, even if it's a Photoshop mock-up. Because you've already got a picture of what they're like inside their head. And so their responses are not going to be swayed in any way. It's safe to do this. And it also is a great way to spot things. Like those subtle things which, like, you're doing it and you just miss it completely. So many times it's like, yes, oh yeah, didn't notice. This is why code reviews are so important. We're blind to what we're doing most of the time. We don't actually see the things, what we think. We interpret what we want to see, not what we're actually seeing. This is why users are a great way just to check, just to make sure. And this is why I'm building a new product called Scrapbook. It's just a way to get this feedback. Share your designs and actually help developers understand more about design, teach design, and get feedback more rapidly from real-world users. And with that all in mind, 5 key points. The use of layout, images, colors, typography, and finally feedback. With this, I consider this to be the foundations, the fundamentals that I apply to all of my applications which I'm building. Even subtle tweaks in how something's aligned or the colors being used can make a huge difference to how the user responds, especially when you're demoing it. You're doing that weekly end of sprint demo, and what you want to do is for that wow moment. If the user's too concerned with it being slightly aligned, then they're going to experience that, and that's what they'll focus on instead of what you're actually trying to achieve. For me, the way I started was just playing, the same way I learned code. Just playing, trying different things, seeing what worked, seeing what looked good, and then asking people for feedback. Just seeing what they thought, and then building, trying, moving on. It would be great if you could give me feedback on Scrapbook. It will be live next weekend, hopefully. But please do start engaging. It would be great to hear what you think about the idea and the concept and how it could potentially help you. And if you would like more information, please just tweet me and I'll happily share the slides or more information if you have any further questions. Thank you.